I'm here. It's just me today, me and the puzzle. So I want to see what it keeps giving me this notice about my bit rate is too high, and I want to. While it's just me today, I want to kind of check that out and figure out what that should be. But anyway, I have a few announcements, and then I'm gonna just talk about some general mental health topics that have come up recently. Um, okay, well, I'm not getting the bitrate warning today, so I'll leave it alone. Okay, anyways, so today, 6 p.m. Central, we have our men's group. We meet every Monday. You can contact me for the link, as always, primalhex at Gmail or on Twitter. And it's a cool little group. If you're a man and want to talk or just hang out with other men, men are this is not a friendly time to be a male. I grew up gay in the 80s and 90s in Trump country, and it was a lot easier than growing up male today, especially in places like the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, etc. So I get a lot of support from just being around other men and talking about the issues that we're going through, like quote unquote toxic masculinity, um, how responsible we are for all the problems in the world, um, how dangerous we are, how unsafe people feel around us, how marginalized people think we should become, um, the usual woke stuff. But it's not just of that. That's just part of it. If you do want to vent about that, it's a good place to do it. But we get into like our own lives and what's going on with us personally, and kind of help each other problem solve. And anyway, it's a good group. Come join us tonight, 6 p.m. Central. Contact me for the link. Tomorrow, I'm very excited. I have Russ. I'm going to be talking with Russell from Canada tomorrow. He is the host of the Canadian Conservative podcast. We're going to be talking tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central. About, well, one of the topics is going to be the employee assistance program, which a lot of you probably have available through your work, or you may not know that you have available, where you can talk to a counselor or mental health professional for free through your job. So he's going to talk a little bit about that program, and probably a bunch of other topics related to mental health and maybe what's going on in Canada. So did I cover all my announcements? So what I thought I'd do today, I put a notice on Facebook and social media asking for if anyone had any questions or topics they wanted me to talk on or questions to answer. And I got a few, two in particular that I think I'm going to talk about. And then I had ChatGPT generate me some additional topics and questions, which I could use to fill in the rest of the hour. So the two topics that came up from my post, or that I want to talk about initially, are what in the autism community we call theory of mind, and also the double empathy problem, and triggers as well. In fact, I think I'll talk about triggers first because they may be a little more universal and relatable, although theory of mind is as well. People may not realize it or know it as much. What do people mean when they say they're triggered, or I'm triggered, or that's triggering me, and what do you do about it, if anything? This comes up sometimes with some of the Zooms I do, not only in certain conversations, but let's say we're watching a movie and there's something in the movie that triggers someone. It usually means it's bringing up difficult or unpleasant emotions, probably, but not always, related to past trauma or past experiences with whatever is on the screen or in the conversation. Let's say you were sexually abused and the movie has a scene where somebody is being sexually harassed, or something that reminds you of the abuse you feel, that you may feel like you're being triggered. sometimes the movies are just uncomfortable. Like there's a lot of intense movies out there with uncomfortable scenes. We watched Black Swan last week, and that was triggering for a lot of people just because some of the scenes were um, kind of hard to sit through visually, graphically. Um, so that's usually what people mean when they say they're triggered. They're in an emotional state that's discomforting for them, or that they don't want to be experiencing, or that's reminding. Because if something calls up your experience of past trauma, you're not only experiencing the emotion in the moment, the reaction to the event. Like let's say the scene of the movie, you're reacting to all the emotions, or you're having all the emotions from the past related around that as well. So it kind of compounds and exaggerates the reaction to the stimulus. So a trauma reaction is almost never about only the specific stimulus in the moment that's evoking the reaction. It's about the entire chain of experience related around that event, or whatever that event is you're associating, or that event is being associated with or calling to mind for you. So um, that's what a trigger is, or what people mean when they say they're triggered. As far as what to do about it, there's many different thoughts and approaches about that. The modern approach tends to be to kind of have an external solution where your trigger is babysat for you. Um, somebody is going to maybe stop the movie, um, take down a post, warn people about the potential for a trigger. I don't do any of that. I'm big on internal locus of control and managing your own triggers. If I'm triggered by something, I have options that I can give myself that doesn't require anybody else to do anything, or stop their movie, or stop the discussion, or not post a certain thing. If somebody posts something that triggers me, I can ignore the post. I can not read the post. I can not engage in the comment section. I can, if the movie's on a Zoom, I can leave the Zoom. I can step away for a second. If it's in a movie theater or at somebody's house, or if it's my own house, I can turn the channel, again, leave the room. You always have the option to take yourself out of the situation and away from the event that's triggering you. To me, that is more of the responsible, psychologically mature, adult way to handle a trigger. If I'm triggered, I don't want the solution or to alleviating the trigger to come from somebody's ability around me to do something about it. They may not have, like, I don't want to rely on the expertise of what may be strangers to manage my trigger for me. I want to be able to know that I can take care of the trigger on my own, regardless of who's around to help. So if I'm being triggered, I manage. I got triggered the other day by a post that I was on a Zoom when it happened, and a post came up. I had a very negative reaction to it based on some past experiences with a similar situation where that did not go well at all. And I was escalating right away. I could feel it happening. And the more I read the post, the more I thought about it. There were people on the Zoom I could kind of talk about it with. I did the cold water thing. That helps too. It helped. What the cold water did. I have this rag a friend gave me, and it's a special material that kind of holds water, so I can wet it with cold water, and then I can put it around my neck, or I could put it around my forehead like a ninja. And so I had that, and I was putting on my face. I had a cup of ice water that I was splashing on my face and neck. Usually for me, it's the forehead, behind the ears, the neck, a little bit on the cheeks and the face, just anywhere up here where the skin is kind of a little more sensitive. I did that long enough to get that reaction, like to get those chemicals to start calming down, and that sympathetic nervous system to start returning to its parasympathetic, my baseline. So when that started to happen, I was able to be a little more like reason a little bit more and approach it from a, again, okay, that's first step, water, getting that reaction down. That gave me the time to start thinking a little more clearly and rationally about it and widening that perspective. Because especially it turned out autism was involved as well. Like, I don't know if y'all know about the Sally Ann test, but it's the test, it's supposedly a test for autism in kids where you have a doll, you have a kid in a room with a doll, and you put the doll in a box. And it's a hypothetical scenario. So you show the kid the doll, and then you put the doll in the box, and then you have this hypothetical kid named Sally Ann come in the room, and you ask, where will Sally Ann look for the doll? And the autistic kid will often say in the box because they know it's in the box. That's their perspective. But Sally Ann doesn't know that it's in the box because she wasn't in the room when you put it in the box. So Sally Ann might look for the doll somewhere else besides the box. So it's kind of, and people that can perspective take quickly, which can be a very big challenge for autistic people, will kind of have the perspective that, well, Sally Ann won't necessarily look in the box because she's not aware. She didn't have the previous information that the doll was not in the box and was put in the box. But an autistic person that's only seeing it from their perspective, and this will bring us to theory of mind as well, will kind of project that on the Sally Ann and say, well, she'll look at in the box because that's obviously where they know the doll is. So I was seeing the post from a very particular perspective of the person that made it, having information that I didn't realize at the time that they didn't have. So once I started to get that broader perspective and look at it from their perspective and realize that, oh, here's what they thought when they were making the post. And it's not necessarily the information. They didn't have the information I have that I'm actually reacting to. That helped to calm it down a lot. And I was able to approach it much more rationally. And then I could figure out what to do, what I wanted to do moving forward in that situation. Did I want to continue participating in the group? Did I want to just ignore it? Did I want to have a talk with the person? Did I want to make in fact, I did make a few comments on the post, but it gave me more options. And this is another thing I use a lot when I'm triggered personally. Like in the moment, figure out what you have to do in the situation to give yourself the best chance of de-escalating those turbulent emotions and returning to your baseline. But then after the fact, once all that's done and you have your rationality kind of restored a bit, one thing I do that helps me a lot, I have the 3 o'clock in the morning rule. If something was particularly stressful for me during the day and I got triggered or something happened, some kind of conflict, or I saw something that got me worked up or upset, if I wake up at 3 in the morning, which I often do, I wake up throughout the night. So if I'm waking up at 3 in the morning and it's the first thing on my mind and it's still bothering me, then I know it's something important and significant to pay attention to. If I wake up at 3 in the morning and I don't even remember it happened, or I'm not thinking about it, or it takes me a few minutes to even recall that it happened, I can usually put it in proportion and kind of not necessarily let it go, but cut it down to the size that it actually is in my psyche. And that little 3 in the morning test is a good indication of how much something is actually bothering me or important on a very deep level versus how much of it was just a reaction in that moment based on trauma or whatever. And reactions are not always trauma. Sometimes they're legitimate reactions to the thing that's happening that have nothing to do with your past trauma. But in this case, there was some past social trauma, at least, involved. So in addition to the 3 o'clock in the morning test, and this is another one I use for suicidal ideation as well, I always give myself a chance to sleep on it, at least one night of sleep on it, and give myself the next day. So I try to give myself 24 hours or so before I make any kind of firm, definitive decision or take any kind of action on the event. With suicidality, I've had this even since I was a teenager, this kind of tool that I use for myself. I never do anything in the moment. If I am feeling particularly suicidal, which I haven't felt in years, decades maybe, but growing up when I was kind of dealing with depression and stuff like that, I always gave it a night's sleep. Like even if you think you want to do this, at least sleep on it. Don't do it impulsively. Don't do it in the moment. At least sleep one night and give yourself a chance to see how you feel in the morning. And that's kind of always helped me. And now I know if I ever have that impulse, I have that night's sleep built in as the next step of the impulse. So it kind of works the same way for triggers or things that get me set off or agitated. So I decided I'm going to give myself a night's sleep. I'm going to check at 3 a.m. when I wake up, see if it's on my, and it wasn't even on my mind. I had to really kind of call it back to memory. And so at that point, it had kind of subsided and I could figure out what to do from that point forward with a much more level head. So is there anything else I want to say about triggers? There's the in the moment reaction of what you do. And I'm just going to say it because that's the type of person I am. And this is how it appears to me in just a very crude sense. But in general, very broad generalization here, I find in general, men tend to want a solution that doesn't have to involve other people, and women want more of a collective solution where somebody is around to make their trauma go away for them, like kill the bug. Somebody's around to kill the bug. A man will kill the bug himself, and a woman will wait for somebody, or the mouse on the chair, like crawl up on the stool when they see the mouse. I'm not drawing any value judgments from that. It's just descriptive for now. But I do suspect, and I have no expertise in this. We're going to have to get my girls on from yesterday that talked about women's mental health. That women or people with more female-based psychology may require different recovery methods from trauma than I do. So I'm speaking from more of the male perspective, or more of the Jeff perspective, which seems aligned with what I observe from other males, in that I prefer an internal locus of control based solution when I'm triggered. Usually when I see other people, like I'm triggered, what are you going to do about this? It's usually in more female dominant environments or more female dominant online spaces. If it's a male dominant environment and a male is triggered, the expectation that the rest of the males are going to somehow come to his rescue is not usually there. Anyway, that's probably a side tangent. So whatever your recovery method is, I encourage it to be under your control and using your own personal agency as much as possible. But whatever your recovery method is, you want to recover from the initial reaction first, and then you want to kind of start figuring out your long-term plan for what you want to do about the fallout or the aftermath of the initial reaction, if any. Sometimes there may not be any, or anything you have to do. So I guess that's it for triggers for now. And theory of mind, I talked about the Sally Ann test a little bit. It shows up in the autism community, but keep in mind that everybody has a theory of mind. Theory of mind is just the assumptions you're making about how somebody else's psychology works, or what. I know I do this, and I think most people do this. I don't see how they could not be. But I make assumptions on what's going on in somebody else's head based on what's going on in my own head, or my past experiences with whatever I'm trying to figure out their psychology around. And it doesn't always work, but it's a starting point, especially when it's like across genders. Men trying to assume what's going on in a woman's head based on how things work in their head, or across cultures, like me being from the South, I make assumptions about how people in the Northwest are going to respond based on how I as a Southerner respond, like around conversation, for example, how willing someone is to engage in conversation, or how talkative somebody might be based on the psychology of where I come from. With autistic people in particular, because we're perceiving the world in ways that differ from the norm, and we're perceiving, so the data we're taking in is emphasized differently, and it's being processed or put together into a mental picture differently. So a lot of times autistic people will have a different theory of mind or psychology from a neurotypical person that will project onto that person and make assumptions about how they're thinking about a particular problem or situation, or how they're going to respond to an event. And it happens both ways. So it's called the double empathy problem, because the neurotypicals have a particular theory of mind as well that they're projecting onto us, and they're making assumptions about our responses and our behavior that are not necessarily aligned with how we're seeing and understanding the situation. So being able to perspective take and understand different points of view, and I like to get beyond the surface and like get really deep into how is this person seeing this particular situation, how did they come to see it that way, like what's their personal background and history. And what helps me a lot is because I study literature and literary studies, and reading literature like Shakespeare or a novel, it lets you into different characters' perspectives, and you get to, through experiencing these different characters and all of their different points of view within the work of literature, you kind of get some practice and training at that perspective taking. So that's helped me a lot. Also philosophy, where you have to understand somebody else's argument and how maybe they arrived at that argument. So I try to do that when I'm trying to understand conflict and where somebody's coming from, and it's particularly in communication breakdowns, because they happen to me all the time. Why is the communication breaking down right now? Because I thought we were so more or less on the same page, but there were assumptions built into that thought that I was not always aware of, and same on their end. So gifted people, I would say, come from a different, or using a different theory of mind than maybe the non-gifted. We process faster, we take less repetitions to learn things, so our grasp of the situation might be a little more accelerated than someone. And not always, because I have huge gaps in my understanding of the situation too, that a neurotypical person will get right away. So I'm not saying I have a superior grasp, I just have a different grasp, with some parts of it maybe arrived at more quickly than other parts of it relative to the neurotypical person. And me being twice exceptional, it's very, you spot it. It's called a spiky profile. We have strengths, we have peaks and valleys. And so that shows up in my communication and my understanding of things as well. So the person asked about theory of mind just in general. So that's basically what it is. There's a YouTuber called Autistic that has a series on autistic communication and the double empathy problem. It's a playlist on his channel, which I think explains it very, very well and uses visuals. And that's what the one I always refer people to understand theory of mind and the double empathy problem. I don't know if I'm allowed to post it in the description or not. Otherwise, I would. But Autistic, if you happen to be out there listening, I think you do great work. Watch his channel, follow his channel. It's one of the best resources for understanding autism and neurodivergence. So that's the two topics that came up. And now I want to show y'all this. Oh, let me get this off of me. It's like a priest. I decided to try ChatGPT to help me out, because I was like, I looked at some websites. I said I wanted just some prompts, some mental health conversation starters. To if my initial plan was I was going to take any questions that people posted on social media and try to answer their questions from my personal experience and my personal perspective. So I got the two about triggers and theory of mind. But then I was looking for additional ones to use to fill up an hour, and I said, let me see what ChatGPT has to say. So I put in a little prompt about what are some good mental health topics to talk about for the podcast, and I could show you. Here is what They're really good. I was kind of impressed. This is maybe one of the more impressive things I've seen from ChatGPT. So I have this whole list of questions and prompts. Um, what does mental health mean to you? How do you prioritize your mental health? Blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to show you, but I'm going to go through them, or some of them. Mental health means to me, I prioritize my mental health. It's my sanity. It's my whole like stability as far as my relation to what I perceive and believe reality to be. I prioritize that more than anything else. If somebody is interfering with my mental health, they have got to go, or I have got to go. I have left jobs. I have left relationships. I've ended friendships. If something's impacting my mental health, I will make an attempt to resolve it so that it can continue. But I don't make 10 attempts. I might make 1 or 2 attempts. And after that, I'm hitting the eject button because my mental health is too important to me to put in jeopardy like that. The things that disrupt mental health the most, mine's not really organic other than this in the sense that PTSD is organic. It's kind of a form of brain damage. It changes your amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal, ventromedial cortex, stuff like that. So I do have the brain features from the effects of PTSD, but I don't have bipolar or schizophrenia or any of the more organic mental health conditions where even if I'm sitting in a room by myself, I could experience symptoms or the condition can progress on its own. Most of my mental health, the things that affect my mental health the most and put it at risk are other people. It's communication breakdowns, it's conflict, it's hostile work environments, hostile social environments. I've talked about getting in fight at doctor's offices before because up here they're so unfriendly and just hostile. Anything that I talked about the emotion of confusion, which I said someone broke down for me into frustration and disappointment. Those are very strong emotions for me where I have one expectation of a situation, or I think I make one assumption about what's going on or how it's going to go, and something drastically different happens. It can throw me into that state of confusion / frustration / disappointment. And that can really affect my mental health, sometimes for days. I've learned to recover pretty quickly from it. So I have the window down now to like sometimes an hour, sometimes half an hour, 10 minutes, depending on the stimulus. But sometimes it would have me like not able to think clearly for days, maybe even week, depending on the severity, the intensity, who's involved. So being able to recognize and identify the precise reaction or emotion that's resulting from a event, and to recover from it and get back on track, get back to that baseline, has helped a lot. And I've just kind of developed that intuitively from doing it enough time, having it happen enough times and doing it. And in the peer work I do, whatever resources I've drawn on to help me learn and develop that. So preserving my mental health is priority number 1, always, no matter what. That is what I put before anything else, and I put at the center of anything that I'm trying to do or any enterprise I'm about to engage in. If I see that I look for red lights and green lights. Green lights means things are okay, your mental health's fine, you're able to maintain your positive outlook and continue to think clearly. Red lights are when that you get little signs or flags or warning signals that has a potential to be compromised, or if I'm in a group and I get triggered. If I get triggered once, no big deal. If I'm getting triggered 2 or 3 times or regularly, I need to look at that group. Is it the group for me? Those are warning flags. I'd say 2 or 3 red flags is probably enough to tell me that that's not the setting for me. It has the potential to impact my mental health. Back up, reverse course. Go find. One thing I learned from the last few years doing enough of these virtual groups, there are a near infinite number of groups and communities and virtual settings you can be a part of. I don't need to get attached or overinvested in any one particular group if it's not going to be a healthy group. So regardless of what the group is, if there are too many red flags, I have no problem going find a similar group or starting a group with the similar people or whatever. I don't need to depend on any one social environment or any one person or any one setting for my mental health. I need to be able to, it's kind of like a reptile where they can't regulate their temperature. So when it's warm, they have to move to the shade. And when it's too cold, they have to go in the sun. That's kind of what I do with my mental health. I know my sweet spot. I know my optimal zone. And when a group or a person is taking me too far out of that, I know how to shift and go find the people or the right support network or community to get me back in my zone or to keep me in my zone. So it's really navigating interpersonal relationships in a way that keeps you, like driving your car on a highway. You want to keep your car oiled. What else do you do? Whatever you do for cars. I don't know. I haven't had a car in a while. Antifreeze, tune up, air in the tire, that kind of stuff. And you want to keep your speed limit at a nice, steady, like cruise control. That's what cruise control. I try to stay on cruise control as much as possible. And when I hit a little bump in the road, that might be a warning sign. I need to take a look at that. If I'm hitting 3 or 4 bumps, then I have gone off. I'm not on the road anymore. I need to get back on the smooth highway and back on cruise control. So I've gotten very good at kind of detecting when I'm moving off road and how to get back on the highway pretty quickly. So that's what mental health means to me. And the second question is, how do you prioritize it? So I think that answers that one too. Are there any specific mental health challenges or issues that you're passionate about? My main experience is trauma. I didn't have any real mental health issues other than, I guess, occasional depression and then adjustment difficulties growing up, which I've talked about before, changing towns and schools. My main mental health difficulties came after losing Mike and the grief, and that's when the PTSD started. So I'm very passionate about trauma, recovering from trauma, post-traumatic growth. I've talked about Dabrowski and the theory of positive disintegration before, and how crises can be used to drive development to where you can become a different and potentially better person than you were before the crisis even started. I'm very passionate about neurodivergence in mental health, because being able to identify and be aware of the nuances between when you have the intersection of mental health and neurodivergence, knowing what's PTSD, what's a meltdown, autistic meltdown, what's a tantrum, there's people with neurodivergence, people with ADHD, autism, emotional regulation, they react and respond to the same stimulus that a neurotypical person with trauma would in different ways. They recover from it differently. So being aware of how the neurodivergence affects their ability to manage the mental health symptoms and how the mental health symptoms impact the neurodivergence is an issue I'm particularly passionate about. Men's mental health, super, super passionate about. I love working with men. I love helping men. I understand the struggles men go through. I get them too. I'm the lightning rod for all the toxic male shit that's out there in our society now. I love creating support around that and problem solving ways to exist authentically as a male in today's society in a healthy way. Not necessarily in a way that capitulates to or accommodates people that are not male. I have always been not even of the belief, it's almost an ethos. I've always lived my life. If you're not in my in group, I don't really care what you have to say or how I'm affecting you, because you're probably not you're understanding it from the outside looking in, the theory of mind again. If you don't have the same theory of mind that I'm working from, I tend to not be that concerned with your experiences. You can manage those on your own, like I do myself. I don't practice anything I don't preach. So if you're not a man, I don't really care how men affect you. If you're not gay, I don't really care how gay affects you. If you're not autistic, I don't really care how autism affects you. Like, I care about what other autistic people are experiencing, or what other men are experiencing, or what other gay people are experiencing. I care about the in-group perspective on the situation, not necessarily the out-group, because inevitably, almost always, there's a value judgment, there's a misapprehension, there's a value judgment involved, and there's usually a request to alter or change your authentic self somehow. And so I've just ignored that from very, very early on as a kid. And if people were not gay and they had all these opinions about gay people and what they should or should be doing, or how they should live, or what caused it, or whether it was real or a fake, I didn't care about any of that. I knew what it was because I was the person actually living it. So I use that as my compass, and what I could gain from other gay people that were going through the same experience. I do the same thing with men's mental health, neurodivergence and mental health, all of my other identities. So I'm very passionate about that kind of personal autonomy, self-determination, developing the authentic self, the Dabrowskian third factor framework. How do you think society can reduce the stigma surrounding mental health? I think normalizing to the extent that you can, and that's one thing I try to do, just not only on this channel, but in my life. Educating to the extent that you can, and my track record with educating people that don't necessarily want to be educated or have the capacity to be is limited. That may not be my particular strengths, but normalizing is. I normalize rocking, I normalize stimming. Whatever I do, I try to make it as normal as possible. I don't allow people to stigmatize it. I find settings where it's, if not an asset, at least neutral and not a liability. If someone's trying to problematize any one of my behaviors or symptoms or identities, I challenge it constantly. I don't allow them to have control of the narrative frame. I take the control over that as much as I can, to the extent that I can, whenever I can. If you're gonna say something like rocking is a, or the perfect one I've told before is the talking with your hands is a sign of violence. No, it's not. I'm gonna normalize talking with my hands over your perceiving it as violence. So I think that be yourself. This is one thing we learned as gay people: just be yourself. Don't let society tell you how to be, and don't change to make society happy. If you don't think who you are is a bad thing, then don't apologize for it, and just be it. Be a positive representation of that. And that's what I've always tried to do. I did that with gay. I do that with autism, with my trauma, PTSD. I do it with my Satanism. I'm trying to be a positive representation of Satanism and show that it can be a force for good in the world. And whatever people think about Satanism, and I get it from both sides. I get it from Church of Satan people who don't think people that are not Church of Satan are real Satanists, and I get it from non-satanic people who think it's a bad thing, or I get it from people who think it's cosplay or a fake religion or just mythopoeia, which in a way it is, but it's also a little more than that too. Anyway, the whole point is, that doesn't affect how I present my Satanism or how I live my life as a Satanist. I can direct it in a way that I find the most positive representation that I want to put out there for it. So, the locus of control. How do I think society can reduce? I can't really control what society does or how they see things. I can just represent and try to normalize any stigma around mental health as best I can. And that's what I did as a gay person. I didn't push in anybody's faces. I didn't talk about it all the time. I just openly lived my life as a gay person. People could get to know me as an individual. Most of the time, 90% of the cases, they could look past the gay, get to know me for the person I was, and everything was fine. We can hang out and engage in activities together and be friends. So that's another thing I mean when I talk about normalizing it. How has your perspective on mental health changed over time? Well, like I said, I didn't really have a lot of experience with it growing up, other than like there was the gifted therapist. I've seen a few counselors, and then I was hospitalized in high school for a little while. But that was all kind of remedial. It was to stabilize me and get me back on a normal track. So when I was just able to live a normal life, I didn't think much about mental health at all. It's when even the grief, I didn't, people kept telling me you need to go to grief counseling, go see a therapist, go join a grief group. I didn't feel the need to do any of that. I just kind of healed somehow on my own. I found activities that fulfilled me. I did the out in the desert thing. I started my outdoor group. I immersed myself in activities that I could kind of get involved in society again. I got the job at the hospital. I kind of moved on in my own way. So even then, I didn't really think about mental health much or turn to mental health. It's not until I guess the move to Seattle and how badly that ended, and then the experience I had after that with getting fired from jobs and the like being seen so differently socially up here than I'm used to being seen. I'm seen as a threat. There's a hostility here around people like me, around male Southerners, autistic people, if they can't understand you or fit you into their box. So I encountered a lot of what I call social trauma up here, and it was persistent. They had the X, and then from that it was like the first job and the next job and the coworkers and the people in the neighborhood and the social groups I'd try to become part of. It was just one thing after another. So it was persistent enough that I finally decided to turn to somebody. Like I don't want to just keep swimming in this dog paddling this ocean by myself. I didn't see any solution on the horizon. So that's when I got involved in the mental health system. I learned about peer support. I became a peer. I started volunteering for the crisis line. So kind of my entry into mental health, I didn't get that much help as a client, but it really started to open new perspectives when I entered it as a volunteer and then later as a professional. I got to see the inside of the mental health system, how far short it falls of its actual potential to be helpful. And I started kind of finding my own path through there. I found the autism community and decided I want to focus mostly on autistic, neurodivergent mental health, gifted mental health, men's ADHD. So it changed in the fact that it gave me a richer, deeper perspective on mental health once I entered it from the other end as a provider, and it helped me see how diverse mental health is and kind of home in on the areas of it that resonate the most for me and that play to my strengths. Are there any resources or strategies you recommend for maintaining good mental health? Diet and exercise. One thing that really helped me after like I said, after in the initial aftermath of the loss and the grief, I was completely non-functional. I was barely aware of where I was. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I lost like 40 pounds in weeks. I dropped I wasn't that big to begin with, but I had my appetite shut down. I had no appetite. I would try to put food in my mouth and my body did not want it at all. And his mom she lived out of state, but we were in touch, and she was asking me about my health and if I was eating, and I told her, no, I'm not eating. And she said, well, give me a list of foods that you would eat, and I'll have a grocery truck at the house the next day with some healthy food. And I said, no, you don't know. I don't want you to do that. She said, if you don't tell me what you want to eat, a truck's going to show up tomorrow with the food that I pick, and it's going to be whatever I decide, and you're going to be stuck eating. And I said, okay, fine. So I Googled healthy foods, and I found a list of, I don't know, 7 or 8 healthy food: blueberries, spinach, walnuts, yogurt was some of them. And so I sent her this list along with a few other items, and the truck was at the house the next day, and I started eating those items. It was healthy foods that Google said was healthy. That was probably the beginning of my recovery right there. Just getting healthy food in my body. It made such a difference. Like that's when the light bulb went off for me as to the effect that diet could have on somebody's mental health. That allowed me to start my body to start processing nutrition again. I started sleeping again. This is kind of just before the time I started going out in the desert too. And so I think just having that healthy, nutritious food after all of those days or however long it was of just not eating hardly anything at all turned my mental health around like that. It was almost like if they'd given me a pill. It was that profound of an effect. And so diet and exercise, I've always been mindful ever since that moment of how important staying active and eating healthy can be on your mental health. And then there's the social part. Now, therapy helps. That helps you deal with the individual stuff, like on the individual level, processing your past trauma, reparenting, working through the cognitive distortions that play into some of the trauma reactions, maybe some attachment work, parts work, family system, stuff like that. That helps you on an intrapersonal level. But the main source of what affects the mental health the most for me is the social sphere. So being aware of what a healthy social situation is, a healthy interpersonal relationship is, and like I said, staying on the highway and avoiding the little pitfalls that take you off road is the number one resource or strategy I recommend. In addition to self-care, there's maintenance, diet, exercise, therapy, there's self-care, recovery from an event that impacts your mental health. And then there's kind of the awareness of how to maintain your mental health by staying in that lane that I talked about, and becoming aware of the factors that have the potential to take you out of that lane, and how to return to that lane and direct it at more healthy settings. Those are the things I'd say more than anything are the resources and strategies that help me maintain my own mental health. How do you think mental health affects relationships and social interactions? I talk about balance and reciprocity. I think it helps with that. When you're mentally healthy, you have more to bring to a relationship, to put into it, and people are more likely to reciprocate it. When I as my mental health recovered, I found that the people that were less recovered than me, there was kind of this differential that started to form between us. And I was sometimes the one carrying most of the relationship, and they were some of the ones needing more out of the relationship. And so I've kind of started looking for relationships where people are more or less in the same place I am, and like the seesaw being level, and you get that reciprocity and balance. So I think that the better your mental health is, the higher quality of relationships you're going to be available for and able to productively participate and contribute to, and the quality of those relationships and social interactions are going to improve. In what ways can workplaces and educational institutions better support mental health? They won't listen to a word I say about this, and they have a gazillion experts that make six figures trying to figure this out for them, that they probably will listen to more than me, but they might not even listen to them. But I could do an entire, not even one episode, I could do an entire playlist series on this topic. I have been in every negative workplace. In fact, I'm going to add that to my list. Mental health and the workplace. I have been in every negative workplace that's affected my mental health you can imagine. And I have been in some really positive, healthy mental health workplaces. So I think I will save that one for another topic and talk about the differences, like what makes the difference in a workplace between a healthy one that promotes mental health and one that will send you back to the therapist office several times a week, more than you go now. And if you're in those, I recommend just leaving. And self-employment's another option too. Oh, hang on. I lost my track. What are some common signs or symptoms that indicate someone may be struggling with their mental health? I can't always tell with the autism. Usually they verbally tell me I'm triggered, or I can see that they're agitated. But if they're just silently masking or holding it in, I may not be able to tell they're that something's affecting them. So I would say some common signs or symptoms is they're verbalizing it. That's what I rely on. Now I've been told with me, like my face flushes, there's a vein in my forehead that pops out, my features kind of get angular. Um, People can hear a change in my tone of voice, but I'm not aware of any of that. That's from the outside. So there may be signs like that, but I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that particular question because I rely so much on verbal communication. How do cultural or societal factors impact mental health experiences? I'll just say one little comment about that, being Cajun and coming from South Louisiana, and then moving up here to the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest. I'm so glad I'm Cajun. These people are so anxious and uptight from just the social dance and game they have to play that I did not grow up with. So I think there are cultures that are less anxiety inducing than others. Cultures that have more of a down to earth, grounded, realistic perspective on human nature and human expectations and what humans are capable of versus cultures that put more pressure on maybe unrealistic expectations. So I'll just leave it at that. I've come from my mental health as a Cajun was much less impacted than my mental health as a Cajun trying to survive in upper middle class West Coast culture. Are there any specific mental health initiatives or campaigns that you find inspiring and impactful? Not really. I was involved in some local peer campaigns in Washington State. They're trying to change how peer support is, how the training and certification of the peer support process happens up here. So I was involved in some campaigns to kind of fight that initiative. I think they're going to fuck it up, but I'm not, I don't have a high opinion of the legislature here anyway. So I expected nothing. It's heavily bureaucratic. It's not person driven. It's not individualized. It's collective and committee driven. And if you get I don't think the voices, two things, the voices that need to be heard are not at the table in the first place because it's political. And when they are at the table, they don't listen to them anyway. So I just don't have a lot of faith in the political system to make effective mental health change. Do you think there's enough awareness and understanding of different mental health conditions? No. And that same goes with neurodivergence. I think, again, if you have mental health conditions, and more of us do in this day and age, especially since COVID, then I think, yes, the understanding and awareness is probably there. But for people that don't understand mental health or on the outside looking in, I think they have a very fuzzy, like they know there's something called mental health. They know that you're supposed to be supportive. They know that people can turn to other resources to help them with it. And then they know there's a thing called autism or ADHD, and that's about as far as it goes, which how realistic can you expect it to go further if that's all? Like, I don't understand a lot about sports or football, although I've tried many times to learn because I'm just that remote from it, and my experience and interests are never going to take me further than that into it. Back home growing up, mental health was prey. If you, they don't really use the mental health system or therapists. It's, well, you need to pray about it, or, well, if you got right with the Lord, you wouldn't be having these issues. So it's more of a personal and religious solution that you're supposed to discover for yourself. So they have like a religious understanding of mental health. So I guess it depends on the culture, the setting. But in general, I think in like movies and television, the representation of mental health is becoming more positive. So again, that normalization and destigmatization. But, give it time. I think I trust people's capacity to develop the level of awareness and understanding that society is going to require of them at whatever point. I don't think you have to overdo it. as long as they're able to be supportive and at least get out of the way if they're part of the problem. How can friends and family members provide support to someone experiencing mental health challenges? Listen, don't stigmatize. You can avoid it. A lot of times you don't, a lot of people are well-meaning and they don't necessarily know the effect they're having. They try to be helpful and they may not be. That's why I say, number one, listening. Let the other person guide you. And the person experiencing the condition needs to communicate. But then when they communicate, trust their guidance and don't think you know better than they do if you don't know anything about the condition. There's resources you can Google your local area. There might be a crisis line. A lot of times, a lot of areas, they're rolling the 211. I don't know. There's some special emergency number for mental health crises that's being rolled into the 911 service that you could call. But be careful about that. A lot of times you get strangers from the mental health system involved that are not familiar with that particular person or their challenges. It can be misread and they can end up in situations that I never turn to if I can turn to a friend or my support network, I will use that every time before I pick up the phone and call an emergency service, because I've just heard nothing. There's so many stories about that just didn't go well for people when they do that. I'm not saying don't do it if that's all you have, but the number one thing I would do or recommend friends and family can do is help them to build a healthy support network that they can turn to so that they don't have to use 911 or end up in the ER. And if you can be a part of that network, so much the better. Are there any misconceptions about mental health that you think need to be addressed? Yeah, I've kind of touched on some of them. We're capable. We can do most things other people can do. We can have jobs, families, relationships. It's not crippling. It's not a life sentence. Just like with any medical condition, like diabetes or obesity, you can manage it. It can be managed. We make just as good friends as anybody else, sometimes better, because we can empathize and understand about a lot of things that other people may not have gone through. We have strengths. We have advantages. Take us on an individual basis. I understand that mental health people can be challenging sometimes and overwhelming, and you're not obligated to have us in your life or support it if you don't want to. It should be a voluntary relationship. If you get a benefit out of being in relationship with us, then I think there's a lot of positives we can bring. But if you don't, it's no judgment against you either. What other misconceptions? Well, one misconception I think is that there's this magic cure, like you're mentally healthy and then one day you'll suddenly be normal again. I don't know that you ever fully recover from mental health conditions. Like I'm always going to have PTSD. My brain's always going to be what it is and hyperreactive and hypervigilant. But you can manage. You can still live a fulfilling life. You can still live a functional life. But your trauma or your mental health is not just suddenly going to magically go away one day. So we talk about recovery and recovery being possible, but recovery is not cure. It's not complete absence of symptoms ever. So that's another misconception, I think. Another kind of misconception, and we're actually going to do a movie on this next week. Our movie this week for Mental Health Movie Night is Gifted, the Chris Evans movie. Next week, it's going to be a documentary called Billy the Kid about this little twice exceptional, gifted, autistic, neurodivergent kid. A lot of neurodivergence to the inexperienced eye can look like mental health. It could look like this kid needs a psychiatrist or is crazy when it's actually neurodivergent. So being more aware and becoming more educated on kind of the subtleties between neurodivergence and mental health symptoms, like the exhibitions of mental health symptoms, can clear up a lot of misconceptions too, particularly like the public, law enforcement, perhaps the school systems, doctors' offices, grocery stores, just anywhere you're interfacing with the public that might have some awareness of mental health, but maybe not neurodivergence. When I was at my last job, we partnered with the local police precinct. We were going to do a project to help police officers become more aware of autism and neurodivergence and how those symptoms can manifest and sometimes be mistaken for mental health. So a lot of times, if you're one of those like public service providers, and even if you're familiar with mental health, you can sometimes maybe mistake or misread autism as needing a mental health intervention when it's actually needs a completely different type, because it's not mental health, it's neurodivergence. So that just takes training, education, and the expertise to give the training, the right expertise to give the training, so that the right information and message will get out. So I guess those are some misconceptions. And actually, I'm at the hour, so hope this was helpful. If you have any mental health questions or topics you want me to talk about, we're halfway through. Today's May 15th. We're halfway through Mental Health Month. I still have 2 more weeks of topics and guests to talk about. So if you want me to talk about a particular topic, have questions, want to come on and talk, let me know. I don't mind doing one of these Q&A sessions again and addressing any questions or topics you want me to address. So with that said, don't forget our men's group in 2 hours, 6 p.m. Central Time. And we have our movie this Thursday and our Gifted TUI Zoom on Friday. And tomorrow I'm talking with Russell from Canada, the Canadian conservative. So looking forward to that. Have a good day, everyone. And I'll be here for that. Take care. Bye.